Well, once again, Gotham descended in quality this week to an episode that was honestly nowhere near as good as the episode from last week. This episode, if I really had to come up with a word to describe it, I would describe it as serviceable. It's okay. And there are a few reasons for that, but first of all, I think the appropriate place to start is what this episode gets wrong in comparison to what last week's episode got right. Last week's episode actually had a really interesting premise. It had a really interesting villain, really great use of a Batman villain property, the Scarecrow, and really nice setup of his potential origin. And it was character driven. The story was fairly compelling, and it was all around a good time. Really, I didn't really have many problems with the episode last week. But but sure enough, this episode descended in quality, and the primary reason for that is that the writers did not seem to know what how good they had it, what kind of a good character that they had in the Scarecrow, or at least the primordial Scarecrow, as this particular version is. And and what I mean by that is this episode really played out like your typical police procedural plot of, the bad guy is causing trouble, he's murdering people, blah blah blah. The police have to stop him, and it really doesn't get any deeper than that. And that's what really kind of disappointed me when you have a villain like the Scarecrow who actually preys on people's fears and and fear being one of the most primal responses to any given scenario, or at least one of the most basic responses. It goes back to that classic fight or flight, and to have a villain who is trying to exploit that could actually make for a very interesting premise. But the thing was, the fact that they somewhat underused the Scarecrow and his premise in this episode really led to a lot of wasted potential in this one. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we got some expansion on why Gerald Crane, Jonathan Crane's father, wants to remove people's adrenal glands. He is actually using them to make this chemical, which he injects himself with in order to sort of train himself to conquer his own fear. His own fear being his basically when he injects himself with this stuff, he sees a vision of his deceased wife in the middle of a burning building, and the reason for that is because his own fear actually prevented him from going into a burning building to save his wife. So that could actually be very fascinating, and the fact that he is trying to drag his son into this could have been very fascinating, but really we don't get much in the way of delving deeper into it than that. And that's what actually really disappointed me. Because think about how much more interesting this episode would have been if the villain had actually confronted Gordon and Bullock about their own fears. How that was sort of set up in the last episode. Harvey fearing dying in an alley, and Gordon, we know all kinds of things he fears right now. So maybe have some sort of uh, allegory or metaphor for corruption in Gotham City. Have him see a vision of Falcone or something like that. But you could have gone to such great lengths with this material, and the fact that they just did some generic police procedural really, again, disappointed me. And aside from that, the stuff with Fish Mooney, I am still not buying in the least. I wish she would just go away, honestly, because Jada Pinkett Smith gives a terrible performance on this show, and I'm not saying that she's a bad actress. I don't really have a whole lot of experience in watching Jada Pinkett Smith, and I realize it could not be all her fault. Some of it could be the writing, some of it could be the direction. But the thing is, the Fish Mooney character and how she is portrayed as someone trying to be tough when in reality you can see through her because she is so transparent. She is so transparent and so phony, because I don't see a tough crime boss when I look at this character. I see someone trying and failing to be tough and menacing. And to see her sort of rise through the ranks of this what looked like underground or underdwelling Gotham City punks, to see her rise through the ranks of that and actually intimidate them, I actually thought really lacked credibility. And the stuff with Bruce Wayne, oddly enough, I didn't mind too much. Do I think he should be in the show? No, I think Bruce Wayne served his purpose long ago, and he should just again go away. But the stuff with Bruce Wayne, I wasn't too annoyed with him this episode, and primarily that had to do with him actually giving a very natural and genuine response to not having a father anymore, because he actually goes on this hike, which I'm not really sure how trustworthy Alfred is letting him go on this hike by himself, but Bruce basically goes on this hike that his father and him used to go on. And basically when he gets to the part where they used to stack rocks to sort of build this makeshift landmark, it was this sort of father-son bonding exercise. Bruce basically knocks over the rocks, and he basically goes into this fit of confusion, anger, desperation, and sadness. And I actually thought that was a really natural response, and it was in sweet contrast to how he's been portrayed on this show up until this point, which is get it, he's gonna be Batman, we have to have him investigating, we have to have him very serious, blah blah blah, which I just completely lacked verisimilitude. This was actually a very believable reaction, and for the first time I could actually see Bruce Wayne as a natural character rather than just being contrived for the sake of, get it, he's going to be Batman. However, even that I thought was a little bit of a missed opportunity, because a recurring theme this episode was fear, obviously, because the Scarecrow was involved. But I actually think what could have easily happened, and what I thought they were going for, which actually would have worked with again the theme of fear in this episode, is actually having Bruce fall into the hole and see the bat and bat or bats, depending on the interpretation, and actually develop this really, really soul-crushing fear of bats, and which, as we all know, he eventually uses to become Batman. I actually thought that would have been a really interesting development, and again, going with the theme of this episode, but again, they just sort of have this... It was a major missed opportunity, because he sort of climbs up the hill with a sprained ankle, and Alfred is kind of sitting there, and the way they eventually have it end, with Alfred kind of accepting his role as sort of a warm fatherly figure, it's good, but again, in comparison to what could have been, how they could have played it, for example, having Alfred comfort Bruce after Bruce was scared to death by the bats, I actually think would have worked a little better. As it stands, it's just okay. And that's really the way I can describe the entire episode, is just okay. It's fine the way it is. It has a few standout moments, namely with the villain, who is still the best part. There's nothing really wrong with the acting, or at least from most parties. But yeah, the next week's episode of Gotham hopefully will be better, but judging by the promo, that does not look like it's going to be the case. So, until next time.